Never let a crisis go to waste. Well, who said that, and what are the implications of that statement on our nation? We're going to talk about that this week in this week's TGIF at Work podcast.
How do I bring my faith to work? How do I tap into the power of God in my work-life call? Why am I going through this adversity? Is God mad at me? I'm Oz Hillman, and I've been helping leaders like you answer these questions and more for over 30 years. That's what this podcast is all about. Let's learn and grow together. Welcome to TGIF, Today God is First.
Never let a crisis go to waste. That's what Rahm Emanuel said, the chief of staff of Barack Obama. Since 2020, we've seen a major shift toward government control, censorship, political and government harassment, and our freedoms and rights being attacked like never before, all under the guise of protection of the public. Culture's not lost overnight, but piece by piece, as we allow small things to be embraced and legalized and allowed in our society. We are the proverbial frog in the kettle who sits in the warm water that's getting hotter and hotter until one day that frog does not recognize the temperature of that water, that it is lethal, and it's too late to do anything about it by then. COVID represents a preview of government overreach and control at levels we have not seen since Nazi Germany. COVID brought us forced closures of businesses, schools, and other institutions under the guise of safety, only to discover the solutions were worse than the virus. The COVID crisis became an opportunity for governments and elites to control the population and provide newfound power to manipulate and control the masses, and for pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer and Moderna to capitalize, making huge profits in the process. We found that the government lied about the safety of vaccines and masks and failed to call to account the source of the virus, China. Fascism descended on our nation under the guise of public health emergency. Anthony Fauci, the self-appointed czar for medical safety for the nation, was found to lie about the safety of masks and the source of the virus coming from the Wuhan lab in China that was part of a research project Fauci helped get funded by the U.S. government. COVID actions on behalf of governments led to statements like, jail them if they refuse the vaccine. The world's number one tennis player was refused entry into a country to play a major tennis event. He was ostracized for wanting to make his own medical choices about his body. He was not saying others should do what they feel right for them, but he chose to refuse the vaccine, and the world would react to his choice, and he would be penalized in his career for that choice. Joe Biden would make a speech in December of 2021 in which he said the unvaccinated were bringing severe illness and death onto themselves and everyone else. You were refused entry into a restaurant without proof of vaccination. You were refused entry into public places without a mask. Friends would refuse fellowship if you were not vaccinated. Holidays were canceled. You were deplatformed and removed from social media if you dissented from the vaccine mandate. Truth-telling about the vaccine became the unpardonable sin. You were blackballed in mainstream media if you didn't line up with the government narrative. Those who questioned the government's actions were now considered conspirators. Let them die hospital policies became known as hospitals were overwhelmed with the number of patients. Today, Pfizer has lost 89% of its manufacturing demand because the truth has come out about the ineffectiveness and harmful effects of the vaccine. Who can imagine a country that allows a school-aged child make a life-altering decision to pursue a sex change without parental consent? But it is happening in America, and teachers and principals are complicit in this horrible crime against humanity. Who could imagine that our public school libraries would be a distribution point for pornographic books disguised as sex education, exposing our children to images they should never see at their age? Who could imagine that our public schools would celebrate transgenderism by hosting events that celebrate this lifestyle? Who could imagine that 4 college presidents, when asked by Congress if murder and rape of innocent children by Hamas and the call for intifada against Israel went against their school's moral code of conduct, could not simply say yes. Instead, they danced around the issue like a good politician. Who could imagine a nation that makes simply asking questions about an election the result is deemed a crime against the nation and punishable by prison? Who could imagine a former president could be removed from the presidential ballot in a state without any conviction of wrongdoing by the courts? Who could imagine that a country would open their borders to anyone who wanted to cross, including terrorists and drug cartels, all to shift the political balance in the country to Democrat, while the Congress became constricted to be able to do anything about it? I often wonder why there are no reporters that ask a simple question of the president: are open borders not allowing terrorists to enter our country? And why are you choosing to be complicit in making our nation unsafe through an open border policy? I personally can't believe our president is not removed from office for failing to protect our nation, one of his primary responsibilities in the Constitution as the head of law enforcement in our country as president. January 6th saw peaceful protesters and a few bad actors, now branded as right-wing MAGA conspirators, to overthrow the government. Government FBI agents were planted inside those crowds. Innocent bystanders got prison time after lengthy stays in jails. Someone was murdered in the process, but there's been no trial or accountability for that murder. This was followed by FBI harassment of Christians and shutting down free speech by parents at school board meetings. Media transitioned from investigation of elite power to collusion to control the narrative on behalf of the elite. The Biden administration was caught manipulating social media platforms to follow their narrative, no matter what that narrative was. The Supreme Court slapped their hand, but no consequences resulted from their abuse of power. Worldwide threats have come through the WEF, World Economic Forum, the WHO, the World Health Organization, and CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, non-government foundations such as the Bill Gates Foundation, and allied big tech leaders, and now the biggest bully on the block, AI, artificial intelligence, which could become the biggest deception play the left has ever employed. While all of this is going on, we're watching liberals devalue the police, refuse to enforce laws that allow criminals to walk into our stores and steal at will with no repercussions, and homelessness and lawlessness to grow in our cities. Lawlessness is tolerated in liberal cities across our nation at an alarming rate. George Soros has funded the election of Marxist attorney generals that put criminals back on the street after they've been arrested. If a citizen protects his property with a gun, they are the ones hauled off to jail. It truly is insanity, but that is what happens when God turns a nation over to a people that operate in a reprobate mind described in Romans. Once you kick God out, He allows you to suffer what life is like without His hand of protection. America is in far worse condition than most understand or realize. We are nearing the end game and a textbook example of a classic imperial collapse unless God intervenes. All of our essential institutions are under extreme strain. Most are inefficient and some are ineffective, from our politics to our education system to our financial system, to our arts and entertainment, and to our news organizations, just to name a few. Our national debt has become impossible to return because there are no politicians that have the backbone to want to go back to a balanced budget. We've lost a common knowledge of and commitment to our founding principles as a nation, and we've lost our consensus as a society about Judeo-Christian morality as the foundation of our institutions and our country. Camille Paglia, a self-identified atheist, feminist, lesbian professor in a prestigious East Coast college, documented the very last sign before the imminent collapse of every single society for the past 5,000 years in her book, Sexual Persona. It's the acceptance of transgenderism. 2 out of hundreds of critical indicators of our current inevitable societal collapse, unless there is a true Book of Acts restoration revival, are the current state of our nuclear families and our current lack of adequately educated Americans who are the prerequisite building blocks for recovery. Let's take a look at the nuclear family today. The single-parent kids before the U.S. welfare system was instituted found that 7% of Caucasian kids resided in single-parent households, and 25% of African American kids resided in a single-parent household. Single-parent kids after the U.S. welfare system was instituted found that there were now 42% of Caucasian kids residing in a single-parent household and 73% of African American kids residing in single-parent households. Those are incredible increases. We know that generally men were raised without a father present in the home or filled with and fueled by anger. This leads to the gang culture and astronomical murder rates in cities such as Chicago and Baltimore. We also know that generally women who are raised without a father present in the home have a tendency toward promiscuity, which is exacerbating our rapid societal decline. Despite our government spending 4 times as much on education as any other developed country, and despite our teachers spending 1,100 hours per year teaching, which is many times longer than any other country, the U.S. ranks 28th in the world in the percentage of 4-year-olds in early childhood education. We rank 14th in the world in the percentage of 25 to 34-year-olds with a higher education. The essential building blocks which all societies need as the foundation for building or rebuilding their society are 3 skills which must be implanted by the school system: reading, math, and science. These are necessary to produce engineers of all kinds and necessary to produce effective and efficient workers in the trades and for the general workforce. America used to be number 1 in all 3, but now China is number 1 in all 3. America currently ranks 13th in the world in reading, 37th in the world in math, and 18th in the world in science. There are many other negative indicators which clearly show American decline, decadence, and societal dysfunction. Our only hope is the Lord Jesus Christ and a true Book of Acts restoration revival movement. History fails to record a single precedent in which nations subject to moral decay have not passed into political and economic decline. There has been either a spiritual awakening to overcome the moral lapse or a progressive deterioration leading to ultimate national disaster. That came from General Douglas MacArthur. America needs a seismic shift, unlike anything we've ever seen in our history. A viral restoration revival movement comprised of the leaders and the people in the 7 mountains, local churches, and international and national ministries, all united around the same goals and working together in unity. Revivals throughout the Bible and history are produced and continually fed by a combination of one-off events and continually daily work over many years to fan the flames and keep the spiritual fire growing. This Book of Acts restoration revival movement will do the immediate and urgent work necessary to bring a halt to our approaching society collapse and lay the foundations for ongoing long-term cultural reformation. In John 4:24, Jesus said we must worship in spirit and truth. We need both the divine move of God and His Spirit, and we must also do the daily work necessary to provide truth, to pile up the kindling and firewood for Him to ignite into a blazing bonfire. What we need is multi-year viral restoration revival movement, which lays the foundations for a move of God and then continues to feed it and oversee it. What we are seeing in our nation is an open door that we as believers have allowed to open and be replaced by evil players. It is a spiritual battle for the soul of a nation founded by God-fearing people who wanted freedom to worship God without interference from the government. Culture shapers are problem solvers, whether they come in the form of whistleblowers, problem solvers in the 7 mountains of society, or at the local school level. They see a problem that needs to be fixed and become influencers when they fix it. One of the biggest problems that needs fixing is our overreach of governments designed to drive a left-wing Marxist agenda. Who will be the William Wilberforce to stand against government that wants to control its people for their Marxist aims? I pray that you will be God's culture shaper to stand in the gap at this important time in our nation. God bless you.
Let's face it, we all want to make a difference. We want to live for Christ. We want our work to have meaning deep down. We all want to live a larger story to make a difference in the world. But how do we do this? It doesn't just happen. We must invest in our spiritual and professional life that involves spiritual mentoring and training. But where do we go to get that kind of spiritual mentoring and professional training? Is it at church, a conference, a school? The Change Agent Master Mentor Program is the answer to that question, founded by Os Hillman. He is a pioneer in marketplace ministry and has had a 40-year advertising and business career, working with clients like American Express, Steinway Pianos, Thomas Nelson Publishers, and a host of other successful companies. He understands the challenge of living for Christ in a pressure-packed business environment. He created the Change Agent Master Mentor Program to help leaders. Us will help you realize your dream of being successful in your career and having an influence on your world. The Change Agent Master Mentor Program is designed for you to realize your larger story, to understand your purpose, to learn and apply your faith life to your work life from us and other proven workspace leaders who are doing it. Our online course and group mentoring will help you become God's change agent, to be a cultural influencer and succeed in your work-life call, and grow in your relationship with God and with other members of the Change Agent Master Mentor Program. Come join us. Let's influence the world together. www.camastermentor.com